First of all, thank you so much for receiving me. There is really no place like ISFiT. At least for sure not in Norway. Maybe some other place, but bringing together young people from the entire world in this fashion, simply brilliant. Congratulations with that, and thank you for coming to Norway, all of you. Then if you want to know what you want to achieve, go to the cinema, look. The world is lacking of raw materials. There is particularly one raw material which is lacking in this world. That's by far the most important raw material. And what's that? Not coal or oil or anything like that. It's political will. It's all about political will. For the first time in human history, it's possible to abolish extreme poverty, if you so wish. For the first time in human history, it's possible to find solutions to all environmental problems. Everything is about political will. And if you want to see how to mobilize political will, go to the cinemas. Watch the new movie about Abraham Lincoln, the most brilliant politician of any nation, any time. Why? Because it's combining two aspects of human life, which is very rare in the same human being, but which we all want to achieve. Number one, he was very good, very high ideals, wanting to abolish slavery. At the same time, he used every trick in the book to achieve that aim, nudging, convincing, threatening, whatever means to achieve this brilliant aim. And that's what we need to do today, have high ideals, want to achieve the biggest topics of our time or the biggest ideals of our time, but you have to find every way of doing that. And that's why you should watch this movie, to look into that. We are in a world which could be characterized by 3 M's in Norwegian language. 2 of them are also M's in English language. We are in a world which is multipolar. That means that whatever we want to achieve, we have to bring together the United States of America for sure, most important power still, China for sure, the second most important power in the world, India, Brazil, Europe, and a huge number of all stakeholders. If we want to solve the problems in Syria, climate change, world trade, whatever it may be, everyone must come together. That's a much more democratic, much more positive, much better world than the world of the past, but still a difficult world because everyone has to come together. It's also a world characterized with a huge middle class. Again, very positive. The average human being is much taller, much fatter, and that's by and large for good, much better educated, and in much better health than any other generation in human history. But there is still 1 billion people who are not part of this middle class, maybe more, and this huge middle class is demanding a huge amount of the world resources and creating economic and creating environmental difficulties. So the big middle class is a positive development. For the first time, most human beings do not worry what to eat tomorrow, do not die from diseases which are completely curable, do have education, simply have a much, much better life. But it's dangerous or difficult for the environment, and we have to resolve that. Then what to do? What are the solutions? Because I want to speak about that, not about the problems. I mean, you all know the problems, but please again recall that these are problems of the environment, of the milieu, the M, in an environment or a world which is multipolar, which is much better, which is with a big middle class, which is much better, and also a world which is much more democratic and much less violent than at any other point in human history. Simply, we are the best and most lucky generation at any time in world history, but that's also why people could demand a lot from us. For the first time, it's possible to resolve the world's problem. That was not the case in the past. If, say, Emperor August at the time of Jesus Christ had wanted to resolve all the world's problems on the environment or on poverty, he would not have known how to do it. There would have been no means to do it. There would have been no movement in society to put that policy into place. So simply it was impossible at that time. For the first time, it's possible. And then people say, you can't do it. You can't resolve the main problems of the world. Then I give them one answer, one name, Brazil. Brazil has reduced the deforestation rate in the Amazon with 70% in 7 years. At the same time, they've had rapid economic growth. At the same time, they have brought tens of millions of people out of abrupt poverty. So that economic development, conserving the environment, and bringing people out of the poverty exactly at the same time. So when people say you have to choose either development, either the middle class, or environmental conservation, simply not true. People say that, just say, give one answer, Brazil. Brazil can do it. Why can't anyone else do it? Then let me give you a 5-point plan for how to resolve the most important environmental problems in our time, while at the same time providing development. Because remember, there is not one poor people in the entire world who would want us to conserve the environment if he or she cannot have development at the same time. I would never allow my children to die from diseases which are completely curable for the sake of the environment. For sure not. Not with anyone else. So we must provide both development and environment, and we must merge the two. Let me give you a 5-point program for how that can be achieved. Number one, we should create coalitions of the willing. That's a term conceived by George Bush. I have to admit he's not my favorite politician, but for sure. But it's a good term. And that's what we have done to conserve the rainforest. We didn't wait for the latecomers. Brazil, Indonesia, Guyana, other nations who want to conserve their rainforest, linked up with nations who wanted to provide money, Norway, the UK, Germany, and others. And we did not ask anyone else for a clearance to do this. We simply moved ahead and made a coalition of the willing. And the results for the conservation of the rainforest have been absolutely remarkable. We should do the same in other areas. A coalition of the willing for the world oceans, a coalition of the willing for the world coral reefs, a coalition of the willing for the world big river systems. These river systems are key to agriculture production. They are very often very polluted. They are key to adapt to climate change. And in so many other areas, the world river systems are where people are living, breathing, making their lives, and they must be conserved and protected, and we need a global coalition of the willing to do that. Secondly, we should abolish all the perverse subsidies of this world. And you won't believe it, but at this moment in this year, the world is spending $600 billion American for subsidizing fossil fuels. While everyone is in agreement that we should phase out fossil fuels and start with wind, hydro, solar, and the renewables, still we are subsidizing what we do not want, rather than subsidizing what we do want to achieve. And if you want to fight poverty, it's much, much better to give the money in cash directly to the poor, or to subsidize health or education, rather than to, in the name of the poor, subsidizing the rich and the middle class while subsidizing fossil fuels. But many, also very decent nations, are today spending more money on subsidizing fossil fuels than they do spend on education and health combined. What a shame. What a complete disaster. But we should remove, and it will not be easy, there are political difficulties, but we should remove all these subsidies for fossil fuels and starting subsidizing renewables and health and education. Then third, we should put the focus on the big global companies. They must be part of the solution. Everyone knows that when we in reality abolished industrial pollution in the western part of the world, in the industrialized part of the world, it's much cleaner in most Norwegian industrial enterprises today than there is in my kitchen back home. Why so? Because at some point the people said we cannot live this way longer. Civil society started mobilizing, politicians started regulating the market, and business stopped giving excuses why they could not act and started acting and developing the new technologies. That's what we have to achieve, and there must be a much stronger pressure on business. What should they do? They should be demanded to make a declaration of their environmental and social footprint. Today, every major company in the world will have to make a financial statement about how they're spending the money and how, income, output, all this. There should be a similar demand to all companies that they are declaring the environment and social impact of their company. It's done. Puma, making shoes, have done it. Body Shop is close to doing it. Many other companies are starting doing this, but we should make that a Norwegian policy to demand that of all companies here, and it should be a global demand on all businesses. I will give you a Canadian example. In Canada, there was a huge forest company, or still is. It's called Victoria's Secret. Then some non-governmental organizations starting to put pressure on Victoria's Secret. They said, your practices are not acceptable. Singling out this company. That company was not worse than the others, but they wanted to prove their case with singling out that company. Starting point, the company said, well, we are not worse than the others. Why are you focusing on us? Why are you so unfair to us? After some time, after meeting with the shareholders, making advertisements in the media, making demonstrations, gradually pressure was built up on Victoria's Secret. They decided to change rather than to fight change. Then they started putting pressure on their subsidiary companies. And after some while, they even started pressuring the Canadian government to introduce the same legislation for the rest of the industry as they have already made their practice, to be certain that there should be no unfair competition. And the end of that process, where this one company was targeted, was a broad boreal forest legislation in Canada, hailed as the most important environmental agreement in Canada by the non-governmental organizations. So you must target companies, and they should be demanded to declare their environmental and social practices. Then fourth, you should demand from Norway that Norway starts using the oil fund in a much more creative way. Today, Norway has specific systems for how we would invest in properties in the UK, shopping centers in the UK. We are the owners of Regent Street, the main commercial street of London. If we can have that, how come we cannot have an investment program in renewable energies in Africa, Asia, and Latin America? It may even be more profitable, because over the last few years, it has been much more profitable to invest in this part of the world than in Europe. But even if it's not more profitable, we can take the risk leveraging from the aid budget, and even if that does not work, we can in the worst case, have a somewhat higher risk with 1% of the oil fund, if we start with 1%, than we do have with the rest. Why aren't we more creative here in Norway? And why don't you demand this from the Norwegian government that we should do it? I will support it if you make that. So we should start coalitions of the willing for the river systems and other issues. We should stop the perverse subsidies. We should make new strict legislation for the companies to make certain that they are declaring the environmental practices. And we should have much stricter demands for the Norwegian oil fund. The fifth issue is that Norway should greenwash itself. We should look into all our practices to look into how we can be greener. I think the most important is to look into the oil sector. True, it's the best oil sector anywhere in the world, but it should not push its luck up in the Arctic, where there is no defense against oil spill. And we should look into whether it's a too big part of the Norwegian economy these days. I saw an example where some cancer specialists dropped the cancer research and moved into the oil sector. That's not what we really do want in this society. Norway should put up a big mirror, look into that, and look into how we can greenwash our society in all ways. In order to do that, we must tap into the biggest sentiment for the environment, which is there among the people, and that is the love for nature. The love of the place I was playing when I was a child, the love of the area which I'm visiting in my holidays, the love of the land of my father, the love of all those places globally we have seen on BBC spectacular environmental programs, simply the love of this fantastic, beautiful planet Earth. You are the first generation. I'm not so much older, so I want to be part of this. We are the first generation who could really, really bring every human being out of extreme poverty, while at the same time conserve and even improve the environment, the climate of this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Solheim. Our next speaker has an impressive track record from several large Norwegian and European organizations and institutions, and was in 2007 voted European of the Year by the organization Young Europeans of Norway. Today, he is representing Bellona at their office in Brussels. Bellona was founded in 1986 and is Norway's most important environmental organization. In the beginning, their focus was on exposing environmental crimes by Norwegian industries. Today, Bellona's priority focus is on renewable energy and carbon management, aquaculture, and on the fishing industry. Bellona is a highly professional organization consisting of nuclear physicists, journalists, engineers, biologists, and economists. Please put your hands together for Paal Frisvold.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you indeed for inviting me to this wonderful place. It's really a thrill and a pleasure to come to Samfundet here. I started my studies 30 years ago, and when I see you, I feel so much, I long so much back to those times, because these are the greatest times in your life, probably. And I'd like to extend right now a big thanks to Kaja for putting all this organization together. Thank you, Kaja. Climate change is taking place. 2012 was the warmest year ever. Storms have become more frequent, rain heavier, temperatures are rising. Drought, floods leads to unprecedented migratory pressure. We see that in the developing world in particular. We see that in Bangladesh, with today's report being released, that 17% of the total population is under a very big threat of having to leave their homes in the near future. The ice is melting. We can observe, this is a picture from NASA taken only last year, observing how much the ice is melting in the Arctic. And as we talked about in the meeting today, this afternoon, that there are grave consequences when ice is melting, not only because it will increase the level of the sea, but also because it diminishes the ice, the part of the globe that can reflect the sun back into the atmosphere. It has an accelerating effect. So, dear folks, this is our challenge. We've got to move from the left side here, from a situation today where we are 80% of all the energy we consume are derived from fossil fuels. We need to make the transition to the right side of this picture, where we have a truly sustainable energy system predominantly or totally based on renewable energy. We are doing today what industry did to man 200 years ago. That led to Charles Dickens writing these famous words, these are the worst of times and the best of times. And as Erik just pointed to you, these are your best times, because never has the world been in a position to solve the problems. We have all the technology, we have all the opportunities, the possibilities to reach the right side of that picture. But as Erik said, we need the willingness. What we also need, an incentive system that allows for a phasing out of the fossil economy and bringing us safely over to the renewable, to a green revolution. So what I would like to speak to you today is, where are those green jobs? Green jobs is a big word. As Dickens wrote his words at the eve of the Industrial Revolution, we are today at the eve of a truly green revolution. But how do we get there? And finally, I want to introduce to you a new concept of restorative growth, and to present to you a pilot plant that we have built to show that it is possible to create green jobs. So the challenge I mentioned is to get out of the fossil. But we are, as also the former speaker said very clearly, we are in a situation where 2/3 of the global population does not have adequate access to energy. Energy is the precondition to grow out of poverty. 1/3 of the global population does not have access to energy at all. So what do we do when we know that we have spent all the fossil fuels available to us to reach our standard of living? How are we then to deprive those who need energy and who need the most abundance, the cheapest, and the most accessible energy source there is, which is fossil fuels? So we have a problem, because at the same time we need to reduce our CO2 footprint with 50 to 80. Well, the next International Panel on Climate Change report, which is coming out this year and next year, will probably say 90 to 95%. So this is a challenge. Erik mentioned the whole range of issues. In Bellona, we are very concerned that we need to look at the total set of issues. If we go in and address one problem, it can easily lead to emergence of another problem, like the water problem, for instance. Today, we spend 70% of water on biomass. We need water for the poorer, we need it for energy production, we need it to cultivate more food for a much larger percentage of the world. That's just one example. But population is growing, energy consumption, obviously, but there is one issue which is not here, which I think we need to take much more seriously than we've had before, and that is jobs. How can we create energy systems that can provide not only sustainable energy, but also sustainable jobs, long-lasting, in sectors that has a future? And I will come back to some of the solutions that we have been working on. So when Lord Stern came out with a famous report in 2007, he said something that nobody had said before. Today we know it's that, but in 2007 it was not common knowledge that we actually have all the technologies available. We just have to put them together, and we have to make them commercially viable, and we have to make them penetrate the markets. So in Bellona we sat down and we said, what does that mean? How can we use the existing technologies and reach what we want, 80 to 95% reduction of CO2 emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, from today until 2050? Well, the upper line you see is the lifestyle changes. In Bellona, we believe in change, but we do not believe that we have to travel less. My God, Norwegians growing up in this very wealthy country, it will be a disaster if they didn't travel to see how the real world is. We just have to find a sustainable fuel for the airplanes that can bring them to China, to Latin America, and for them to see how the world really looks like. But the big part here is the energy efficiency part. That is the buildings. Those are the low-hanging fruits that are probably the most inexpensive and the ones that every person can actually contribute to. It has a large potential, but it doesn't get us far enough. Renewables, I think if we had made this curve today, we would have increased the renewable part, because that is actually, with the development in Germany, for instance, and the scheme set along in the EU, we see the renewables industry have taken up much more than was anticipated. But the orange thing here is very interesting, which takes a large chunk. That's the production of biomass with the technology of capturing the CO2 and storing it, which is the blue one also. So the orange and the blue has a major component. Almost 25% of all CO2 emissions can be removed using this technology. And I shall talk a little bit about it. You see at the very bottom, it's land use change, agriculture. In 2050, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions will be agriculture. So then we looked at how do we then make the transformation. And we quickly saw that all these industries that we have to build, that we have to invest in, they are heavily energy intensive. The large volume of energy to build the silicium and the aluminium for the solar cells, for instance, the cast iron for the windmills, the fertilizer for the biomass, and the production of electricity and hydrogen for the new transport sectors. These are all energy intensive. So we need a transition. And that's why Bellona has worked on a quite controversial technology, but a technology that we believe is vital to get us across this valley of death, to get us towards the new the economy. It means that you burn fossil fuels, but you can capture the CO2 and store it safely kilometers under the seabed. But CCS has other features to it as well. You can actually use CO2 to enhance more oil and gas from existing wells. I know I speak technically now, but there are some engineering students in the audience. Today we use a lot of natural gas and water to extract oil and gas. If you use CO2, it will be much more efficient, and we can get more out of existing wells and not having to go to other places. We are very opposed to opening new fields in Lofoten, to go to the Arctic. We want to use this technology for the oil companies to remain where they are. We can also create hydrogen production for the transport section. And with hydrogen, you can have fuel cell engines, both in ships and in automobiles, of course. I have a picture of China there. You know why? Because 3% of the total CO2 emissions from China comes from fires in coal beds. They are impossible to put out. But with concentrated CO2, that's the only way to extinguish coal fires, bed fires in China. So we need a complete energy chain, as you see here. But the really interesting part is this. If we can produce sustainably produced biomass, because biomass is also food, we must not threaten the food production. But if we can find a way to produce biomass and then burn it to create energy, capture the CO2, then we remove CO2 from the atmosphere. We go carbon negative. This is a future sustainable environmentalism, because when I then drive my electric car, which is generated by electricity from biomass production or burning biomass with CCS, then the longer I drive the car, the more CO2 I will remove from the atmosphere. So we have the tools, but Erik spoke of the political will. Erik Solheim was at this meeting. This is a famous picture from Copenhagen in 2009, when the old world had its last meeting, in a way. Because these guys, Obama, Sarkozy, the EU, the transatlantic alliance, they were not able to get it together. So the positive thing is that the world has become multipolar. It's become more democratic, you can say, in the sense that it is no longer these guys who just make up their mind and then the rest follow. But our problem is that here was a photographer. In the other room, when the Chinese, the Saudi Arabians, the Russians, the others sat, they don't allow photographers in the room. And that is a challenge that we have. That's why it's important that Europe takes the lead. And Europe is in fact the only region in the world that has committed itself to reach the 2-degree target that has been agreed upon by the United Nations. Here is a plan that was launched last year, whereby the EU shows how they will get to a reduction of CO2 emissions by 80% in 2050. We need regions like this that show the way, that show leadership. And it works. I am the first one to be told so many times that whatever the EU does, they're not going to make it because they only quarrel and they never get to the point. Well, look at this. This shows change in power generation from 2009 to 2012. It has been a tremendous success, the development of renewables in Europe over the last 4 years. Because Europe cannot afford to be reliable on importing fossil fuels. Look at these figures. 84% of its oil and 64% of Europe's gas is imported. Only in Greece, that we know are in dire economic problems, spent 9% of its GDP on importing fossil fuels. We cannot have it like this any longer. That is why I do not see Norway, I do not see favorably on Norway's strategy to think that Europe shall just change from coal-fired energy to gas-fired energy, because that will not solve the problems of Europe. And here comes the tricky part. And here comes the part where Erik in OECD and other people from developing countries might think that we are playing with fire. Because this is what I believe is an important tool to ensure that Europe and some countries can go and take a lead. We are calling for a border tax adjustment, which means that if you buy a vehicle, a car, from a country that has no climate legislation and import it to a region that has a climate legislation, well then you shall have to pay a tax at the border that is equivalent to the amount of CO2, the price of CO2 that is spent to produce the car. And similarly, if you produce it inside a climate-restricted economy to a non-climate economy, you will be reimbursed. With the deindustrialization of Europe, we cannot go around some mechanism. And the EU has already started when they have introduced the aviation sector to the emission trading system. That means that any flight that comes, wherever it comes from in the world, that lands in Europe must pay a part of their CO2 emission. This goes straight to the heart of this conference, of this festival, because you are dealing with trade. It's a controversial issue, but I submit that it's an issue that we have to deal with and we have to discuss. So finally, now my time is up. So now I come to the innovative part. Because the best way to predict the future is to invent it. That's what we say in Bellona, and that's why we have introduced the concept of restorative growth, where we want to create green jobs that are totally CO2 neutral and that allows for carbon negative. We had the idea that you can use salt water, you can use CO2, You can use desert, everything that we have too much of. And we can create what we don't have enough of, which is fresh water, sustainably produced food, and sustainable energy. We developed a plan. We've got 2 major companies, Yara, the world's largest fertilizer company, and Qafco, its colleagues in Qatar. Here are they presented by the CEOs, as well as the prime ministers of both countries. They signed an agreement. We started building, and we launched it at the United Nations climate talks now in November last year. So here you have a 10,000 square meter plant with concentrated solar power, bringing in salt water that is transformed into fresh water that can generate the biomass. And we have indoor and outdoor vegetation. Here we can create what nobody thought we could create, namely green growth, biomass, fuel, food, and indeed we can create jobs in areas that have never been looked at in a similar fashion. So this is the Sahara Forest Project. I invite you to go into our website. We have a very nice little movie that explains all the details, and we believe this is a project of the future. We are also starting the same with the ocean to create an aquaculture, marine environment that can create energy for the future. There is no time left, so all I say is thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was very inspiring. Gave us all a bit of hope. Our final speaker is from the Philippines. Thank you. Our final speaker is from the Philippines and is the founder of MyShelter Foundation. He is a Massachusetts Institute of Technology graduate and a social entrepreneur. He is also a TED Fellow and was profiled as an agent for change in PBS NewsHour. He's working to make affordable, green solutions for real-world problems, and he really loves bottles. Please give a warm welcome to Illac Diaz.
One second, guys. Okay. And we're good. Thank you for inviting me here. Hopefully it will turn on. Wait. I got an extra 2 minutes, right? Yeah. Maybe we can put that. Wait, one second. You know what? can we just do it this way? I'll just go through the slides, even though if it doesn't want to play. It was playing a while ago. Anyway, let's do it the old way, which is wait. You left me at the most difficult point. In the end, it works. Wait, okay, let's just work this. Okay, go work. Okay, guys, we'll do it. We'll do it slowly, and we'll just have it like broadcast out. Okay. So, one of the things that I always wonder about when I hear speeches on climate change is, where do I enter in this, right? Because large solutions, large problems, large solutions, large money, large government, large aid. How do, I go to rock concerts, and they go like, this is all for the environment, all for the environment. And then at the end of the rock concert, they go, the solution is up to you. And I was like, okay, and then we do the fun run, and then we cross the line, and then the solution is up to you. I come from a place where green technologies affect less than 1%, maybe 0.5%, point something. That's because when you import green technologies to a developing country, you buy the patent, you buy the importation, you buy the specialty. So people have to come in to implement it. And by the time all of this comes through, it actually is so expensive without subsidies that it's very difficult to implement large-scale green solutions. And it's not to say that it's not going to happen. It just says that it's not going to happen anytime soon. So while places with opportunities to develop green technology is happening, I look at my country and say, wait a minute, the poorest are the first ones that need green technology. For every money that we save, it can be for nutrition, it could be for education, anything that we don't have to spend for such expensive green technologies. Maybe we can use it to mass produce it somehow. How do you use youth power in spreading green technologies? So while we're waiting for the finance, for all the pledges, and you know that it's gone through a lot of COPs for these pledges to actually happen, we're thinking, how does it happen? Now, this picture just highlights when I came back from school, I realized why it was so important for us to have it, and it's because climate change is something that maybe you're predicting in the future, but it's something that we're the first in line. This German watch said we're the first one to be hit, and the poorest ones are the first one to be hit. So how can we make a difference? 80% of my city went underwater, and why did it prove it? Because when buildings sink, you have no water, you have no food, you have no energy. It's like these islands of buildings. And we move all of the people, over to either they stay there or they move into refugee centers. Now, one of the things that really interested me was, how can we use innovation as a way to make a difference? And one of the things that I realized was, in case of emergency, the first thing that you need when there's a light out is what? A flashlight, right? What happens if there's not enough batteries to run that flashlight? So my interest was really how to give all of these people emergency lights. And the second one, if climate change is going to happen in a cyclic motion, how do we solve it for a long time? So instead of giving like food, water, and energy, as an aid factor, consumption factor, we wanted to try something really crazy. And one of the things that we had a lot of in the disaster areas was bottles. And so it actually works with this, but doesn't want to play. So we'll figure that one out. So there were, behind the refugee centers, there were thousands of bottles. So they come in plastics, and they put food and water. So we're thinking, how do we give these people emergency light? And so the first thing that we did was solar energy. Then we were talking to people abroad, how much is a solar battery lamp? How much microfinance to do it? And we said, we're never going to get enough money to make a difference. Or if we're ever going to get it, we're going to spend it, and then 70% of the time, but we're going to help maybe 4 or 5 people. How do we help people? And so what we really started considering is, what is the most available resource that we have? These plastic bottles, these people that pick up these plastic bottles in the yard, how do we use them instead of high-tech factories, expensive patents? How can we use the people that, that were unemployed by these disasters? How do we get people that were the most people that, were not part of this green economy? And how do we create a green economy, not from top down, but how do we create a revolution from the bottom up? How do we involve the youth? How do we involve the people that were, earning the $2 a day, instead of just saying, stand aside, here I come, I'm going to give you the technology, maybe 20 lamps, and then you leave them for the next year with it, to pay it off, or little aid. So we wanted to say, can we innovate something from the most available resource, which is trash? So we used unemployed people. So one of the things that first came to us when the reason why we got involved in it was basically they were asking us, there were 2,700 classrooms that were destroyed, and the students had to go back. How do you rebuild them? And we thought, the Western way, which is how much is hollow blocks, how much steel, and how much is cement. But that didn't work out. It looked so expensive that we could only build one. So we took those plastic bottles, we filled them up with mud, we tested them when they dried, then we got more volunteers to fill up the bottles. But what was interesting is when you mix chicken feathers with cement, it would bind strongly together, and then the bottles filled with soil, when it dried, would make a great brick. So what we're saying is, wow, we can actually rebuild these 2,700 schools, not by importing all this money, but really just using what was there already. So this started our way of thinking that, why not do something open source? Something that if you can build with the basic elements that they had. So the 3 rules, things that they had already. 2, use the simple skills. And 3rd, make it a business. Instead of the old world, which is, help me gather all the funds in the world to actually mobilize a few people to help them. Our problem was, how can you create solutions that make central figures obsolete? How can the young people come together and solve things? They won't solve the big things right away, but how do we mobilize young people to solve things locally? So basically, on the sides were plastic bottles that were filled with cement. That were filled with soil, and then we just mixed bird feathers and cement to hold them together. And then we didn't have enough money for all the flat glass, so we used the gin bottles to do it. But and we told people, and this is a joke, but not really a joke. I said, why don't you just give it to us full of gin instead of just always empty? But never worked. But the point was, we wanted solutions. If you think, the way of thinking here was, what if we could give solutions that everybody could replicate? And in fact, every 2 weeks, there's enough plastic bottles and glass bottles that can build a classroom. So really, this kind of new way of thinking was, what if you don't have enough materials? How can you do it? When we started building it, we made a mistake in the first one, not this one, but we built them dark. This goes back to the energy problem. So when we built the first ones back, so when flooding happens, you have the roof, but the walls collapse. So our main thesis was to rebuild just the walls. But we built them in the same way, with same glass, same amount of windows. And we never knew that, because the funds never arrived in the rural areas fast enough, that the teachers would keep the lights off. So yes, we were thinking about, like some kind of green energy, some kind of green tools, green rebuilding technologies. But the one thing that really bothered us was really, how do you bring green light inside so that expense won't be so heavy? And this is basically where we started understanding how to use the bottles once again. This was the same, remember, you use it for 5 minutes, for the next 1,000 years, you're gonna bury it underground. So one of the things that we were testing is, when you filled it with mud, it served as a good brick. But if you filled it with water, especially when we were testing out the different kinds of ways to fill it, sand, soil, we would get this beautiful light during sunset that would light up the whole classroom. And so we started looking at this and saying, maybe, you know, you don't need solar panels, inverters, batteries. Why complicate it so much? Just like when building, why complicate things when you can actually approach it from a very simple way? Okay, I know I have little, but I wanted to show you how we did it. Please work. So just very quickly, I'll show you how we mass produce these lights.
Itong lugar namin, Sitio Maligaya Dos, San Vicente, San Pedro, Laguna.
Eh, siyempre, alam mo naman, ganitong lugar, squatter area, tabing release, dikit-dikit ang bahay.
Madilim talaga rito sa lugar ko na to.
Wala kami dito sa loob, lagi kami sa labas.
Nadadapa kasi madilim, yung dadaan mo, hindi mo alam, may nakaharang.
Tutulog na lang ako, wala ilaw eh.
Ang tawag nila sa akin dito si Mang Dimi Solar. Napaliwanag ko yung mga bahay nila madilim. Bubutas ka ng yero, lalagay mo yung bote, lagyan mo siya ng sealant, bago lagyan mo siya ng tubig na mineral, lalagyan ng sunrocks. Bago kabit mo sa bahay, lagyan sealant mo para hindi tumulo. Ganun lang kasimple yun. Dati nga ito kadilim nung bago ko pagkakapitan. Ngayon nung kapitan ko na, ito na ang liwanag niya. Yan ang liwanag.
Pumili po ako kasi bote lang, tubig. Maliwanag na yung bahay mo.
Bumaba yung ano ko, binayaran ko ngayon. Simula rin makabitan ako dito. At saka itong solar bottle bulb na to, hindi mainit.
Dahil sa buti na yan, sa solar na buti na yan, gumanda ang araw namin.
Ang nalagyan na namin ito ay bali 643. Gusto nga namin tuloy-tuloy para marami nga matulungan mga tao rin na yung maliwanagan mga bahay nilang madidilim.
Parang katulad na rin ng bumbilya. Yung dati natin nakakalimutan at pakinabangan na ngayon.
So our point is, how do you change the world with absolutely no, just a little amount of money, without a big government? I'm saying there's two ways, right? There's the big way, and maybe there's the better way that nobody really understood, which is young people, instead of big trucks, big finance, why not human hands, something that everybody can do? And if you can get enough young people around the world, we can actually, if each of these lights saves about $10 every month in electricity bills just for the light, how would that be? Today, we've actually hit 300,000 houses in 1 year. Next year, we're going to hit more than 1 million houses. And the nice thing there is it's open source. Now, but we give the way that you do it to anyone around the world that does it. And really, in the next few years, it's very simple. The light will go into the top, and then because of refraction, the light will basically, instead of, if there's a pinhole, it will reflect down. The light will refract and basically light up 35 square feet at zero cost, zero carbon. It saves about 240 kilos of carbon. So what's dark is now light. Great for women. Instead of using kerosene, they can now cook. It's white light, so the schools that we wanted to light. But our point was, can young people with good ideas change the world? And so what we did was we said, first of all, why does it always have to be, you want to come in and say, here we are, and we're going to change the world by donations. As much as a company has a tax deductible, will help you. But to tell you the truth, they cash burn it, and they never come back till a couple of years later. And we're thinking, what if we just give the technologies, give the tools to people where they can, for $1, make it, and then for $1, install it. We have about 50 around our countries, and they make around an average of 10,000 bottle lights each. Light up homes. And then we use prisoners to make it, more than 5,000. We pay them. And the most interesting part is we put all around our city, do you want solar lights? And of course, we can't afford to have trucks to go there and install it. So we basically give the address to people, and they go out and they install it for us. So solar power to the people. While we're waiting for aid and finance and people to say, you know, that vision of green technology, I want to give green technology, but first give me the money, give me the aid. What we're saying is maybe we should just give it, you know, have new ways of doing it, new strategies of doing that was never tried before. So they go all around the cities with each one funds its own tools, and they install it. So we've done that in 5 areas. But the nice thing really is the fact that we put this on internet, we put how to do it on internet, and next thing you know, we're like in 10 countries. And so this is our work in India. Very quickly, I know I'm running out of time. Yes, I know, time's up, but I just want to show you just something very cool, which is, remember how young people are so helpless? To be the largest grassroots lighting technology, community grassroots lighting, solar lighting project in the world, was never something we thought of. All that we said is, how do we give lights to people when they don't have during the flood, but during regular time, can it be something that they can use? So Colombia, these are about 5,000 houses.
Again and again and again.
Kenya is hitting about 20,000 houses now this year. The green economy is really not just to be given to large groups, but it's to be restructured be put into the hands of the youth.
And you know,
and this is sometimes forgotten in the movement. It's always large money, and to think that sometimes, you know, they even brought us to Spain. Spain, who does Spain? I mean, what do they have there? They have also, they also have gypsies. Sorry, just 2 more minutes, because this is the more grassroots part of the green economy. I'm sure you've seen the problem, but after all the freaking awareness, I mean, let's just go down to, okay, what is the solution? And what is the solution that the youth could do? What is something that can be given to us where we can all get together and do something? So basically, people have seen that part, but the real deal was, how do we make it night? And so what we did was, we said, first give it to them for free so that they can earn the money, like $10 of savings. So, sorry. I'm a little bit unprepared, but what if you can catch solar light instead of spending like expensive technologies on top of the roof?
Okay.
So charge it with the light during the day. Sorry, just the night, but basically charge it with soft plastic so that you can sort of like light it at night. So this one is all built in country. So yeah. Anyway, if you want to catch it. So basically, why solar? Is because, you know, it solves some of the greatest problems very simply. Now that you bring in light, you can actually solve not only for lack of energy poverty, but also for food. So now that light can come in, you can grow food during disasters on vertical bamboo. So you put a water that drips. The point is not that this is the solution. The point is really that, you know, maybe we have to think of something that does not have to go through, you know, through big government. That maybe we should also come up with something that, you know, would sort of help do it. So what we do is really interesting. We instead of making them in debt, what we do is we try to to save them enough money to do something. So this is sort of, I'm finishing our hydroponic system that we also use bottles to solve it. But really, just the new ways of doing it. We build houses out of soil, schools out of soil, bamboo, things that, you know, kind of were forgotten. But my point is, why think big that helps few rather than in a very development world model, do something small that's revolutionary, that you just improve the lives of everybody in a small way, all at the same time, and maybe you'll make a bigger change for all. That's my speech.
So thank you so much for your speeches, very inspirational, all of them. I can start with the most important question, and that is, what do you think of ISFiT? Yeah. Mr. Diaz?
I think youth are very much, they're made aware, but the thing there is they forget what power we have. And with the internet, ideas and NGOs have never been as powerful. And so the same with ISFiT, is the power of ideas is incredible, but the transmission only of awareness and is just one point. The point is, how can you bring them back with solutions? And because if these people all do it at the same time, you might just find out as bringing the next greatest revolution of them all, which is, you know, the power of the people, the power of ideas, the power of the youth, and the power to think differently. And that's what ISFiT is, and that's what MyShelter is, and I think that's what we're trying to bring out here.
I studied in France, in Italy, and in the United States. And I think that some of the most thrilling experiences of those days, of that time, was really the interaction, the meeting of people, the meeting of cultures, the coming together to exchange point of views, to exchange experience, and to exchange lives. And so I think that you are incredibly lucky, because when we studied, there was no such thing. And you have a wonderful opportunity to come here. And I'm almost a little touched that you are coming all the way to Trondheim from all over the world to experience Norwegian winter, Norwegian ski, Norwegian culture. And I do hope that you leave a lot of your own culture with the people from Trondheim too.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are two, I spoke about political will and political leadership, and there are two sorts of political will which is needed, or political leadership. Is the bottom-up approach, which our colleague from the Philippines emphasized, and which is ISFiT, and it's the top-down approach, which is Barack Obama or Jens Stoltenberg, our Prime Minister, giving leadership. We need both bottom-up and top-down, and fortunately, they are just enforcing each other. Let me just cite one example. I started with Abraham Lincoln and the crusade against, or the fight against slavery. Please remember that 200 years back, slavery was considered absolutely normal. Absolutely normal. Christians said this is in the Bible. Muslims said this is in the Quran. Economists said this is so important, the British Empire will go under unless we have slavery. And then a few young people in London picked the fight, asking themselves the question, hi, is it really normal to enslave another human being? And they started this, and it rolled on and rolled on and rolled on, climaxing with people like Lincoln, which was top-down leadership. And today you won't find, I mean, there are still people living in slave-like conditions, but there is not one TV channel or one magazine in the entire world propagating the idea of slavery. Not one. The fight is fully won on in the ideological level. And there are many other similar, I mean, the fight for against discrimination of blacks in America is another one. You can find so many others. And leadership from below by young people is what we need even much more of in today, and ISFiT is part of that.
Thank you. I think we go straight to the questions from the audience. When you ask your questions, please keep them short and to the point, but also please don't forget to say where you're from and which workshop you're from. So our first questionnaire is Rachel Spiegel, and Yulud can make ready.
Hello, my name is Rachel Spiegel. I'm from Workshop 10 Consumers. My question is to the first speaker. Your first point was about the coalition of the willing, but how long can we have a coalition of the willing? The first thing that came to mind for you was the Kyoto Protocol. The United States, where I'm from, did not sign, and that had a big impact on the influence of that treaty. So how long can we only just suggest that businesses and governments come together for those who want to?
Well, I think many coalitions of the willing can last for very long. I mean, let me cite the one coalition of the willing where I have been most involved, and that's the coalition of the willing to conserve the world rainforests. Why did we set up a coalition of the willing? Mainly because there was no way we could come to a real conclusion through the climate change negotiations. Why so? Because a few nations blocked. One of them being Saudi Arabia. As far as I know, there is not a single tree in Saudi Arabia. Most certainly there is no rainforest. No one asked Saudi Arabia to pay for the conservation of rainforest, but still they blocked a global deal. Why? Because they used this as a tool in the negotiations to achieve something completely different. They wanted to achieve a compensation for the possible reduced oil price, which could come up as a result of a successful climate deal. So they, so to say, hijacked the rainforest agenda for that purpose. Then we said, we cannot wait for Saudi Arabia. It's more than sufficient that those main rainforest nations, Brazil, Indonesia, Congo, Guyana, many others, Colombia, that they take the lead, add up nations who are ready to pay, your country, the United States, Europe, Japan, Norway, and others, and the vast majority of other nations in the world who want to contribute. That's more than sufficient. We don't have to wait for the few latecomers who don't want to join. Leave them aside and let's go on. And I think this can be replicated in many, many other areas. You don't have to need, you do not need 100% global agreement. You simply need the main stakeholders, and then you can not just start it, you can fulfill the purpose with the necessary number of stakeholders.
Nothing to add? Yeah.
I just wanted to add about there's this feeling of coalition of the willing by liking or sharing your Facebook. That's not going to make a change. I'm just saying, liking or sharing your Facebook is never going to feed the world or change the world. That's just the start. Most young people feel that they've made a difference, but that's not the difference. I just wanted to make that clear. So you might be part of that willing, but you have to get out and do it.
I actually used an example in my presentation, which is sort of the coalition of willing, is where the European Union wants to show that it can put its political and economic power together and to set an example. And they will not accept that the others do not follow the rules or that the others do not take their share of the burden. So what we see now, for instance, is that the EU has said if the other nations do not introduce any emission regime for their airline industry, they will have to pay when they enter the European Union countries, including Norway because of the EEA. And what do we see? Well, China is now drawing up its own emission trading scheme for its aviation sector. I would submit that I don't think China would have done so had not the EU dared to go in the front, to take the lead, and to set an example. So Coalition of the Willing is also about the willingness to show and take leadership.
Our next big questionnaire is Gyllud, and Synne Mari Pedersen can make ready. Gyllud Karneyved. No? Ah, there you go.
Hello. So my question is for the second speaker. I wanted to ask you if you could please specify which activities of the companies, when you talked about Victoria's Secret and the fact that it was recognized as non-environmentally friendly, which activities actually make companies environmentally friendly or the opposite? What are these activities like more specifically? Because I couldn't quite understand.
So I think what we're trying to show is the solutions. We have a set of problems, but we want to shed light on what are the business opportunities. And that's why we are defining and promoting those solutions. So my point, what I try to make is, now we have those solutions, the technology is there, the possibilities are there. How do we make them commercially viable? What is the kind of regime that we need to put in place? And time didn't allow me to expand on that, but there are several ways of doing that. Erik mentioned one thing, for instance, is to draw subsidies from the fossil sector over to the renewable sector. You know, today, even in Norway, we give far more subsidies to the oil industry than we give to the renewable industry. And so there are several ways. The EU has chosen to use the Kyoto instrument, which is emission trading scheme, but it has vast problems. The price of emitting CO2 has fallen from 30 to 20 to 15 and now down to €2 per ton of CO2. So we have a set of issues that we have to address. In Germany, you have a special system for paying extra money for those who buy electricity that is made by renewable energy, not by nuclear, not imported fossil fuels, but by wind and solar. That has proven to work phenomenally effective. So we have the tools, we have the technology, but it's really going back to Erik, we need the political will to introduce them.
Any input from, no? Okay, yep.
I wasn't just sure, I mean, political will to introduce this kind of policy is good, but I wasn't quite sure, talking more specifically about the companies like Victoria's Secret, like I'm not sure, like on the basic level, what makes them environmentally friendly or not. Do they have to use certain, I don't know, solar panels, or do they have to do something? I wasn't just sure how that works with the companies.
So were you asking specifically about this Victoria's Secret?
Yeah, or other companies, because I mean, no, I was just trying to say that we're talking about politics and companies together. Yeah. So I was curious more about companies, like what they should be doing to be recognized as environmentally friendly.
As far as I understand this issue, I mean, this is from Canada, who do not have rainforest, but do have huge pine tree forest, boreal forest, one of the biggest forest nations in the world. Victoria's Secret is a company operating forest business in Canada. They are also in the making catalogs for post order or mail order shopping. So that it's a big Canadian company. Victoria's Secret, apparently, according to the non-governmental Canadian environmental organizations, had a bad environmental practice. I do not know, but that's what they claimed. So they decided to target that company. Not the entire industry, but one company, exactly to get the competition between the companies going. They targeted that. They went to the shareholders' meeting, making speeches. They made advertisements in the media targeting that company. Simply, they made a huge public awareness campaign in Canada targeting bad environmental practices of Victoria's Secret. Victoria's Secret started responding, no, we are not that bad, others are worse. Why should we change our practices? It's too expensive to change. All those normal excuses made by companies if they do not want to change. Then they simply continued that campaign, and the top leadership of Victoria's Secret decided, let's rather make the change than fight this campaign. Then they changed. Then Victoria's Secret, of course, started making demands on their subcontractors, which is a huge industry. So the subcontractors had to change. And at the end, Victoria's Secret said to itself, well, if we have done this main change to the environment, we will be much better off in the competition if we force all other companies to do the same change. So they started appealing to the Canadian government for legislation which will cover all the other companies. And then at the end of the day, it was a broad agreement between the business, civil society, and the Canadian government, which has completely changed the business environment for the forest sector in Canada into being much, much more sustainable. But it started with non-governmental organizations targeting one particular company and used that as a vehicle for change. So it's a fantastic example on what could be achieved, and most certainly similar campaigns can basically be done in every country in the world, including Norway.
Good.
Thank you very much.
So next question is from Synne Mari Pedersen, and Mihai Klapanewic can get ready. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Synne Mari and I'm from Norway. And Paal Frisvold, you said what we all know. We need to get out of the fossil age. And then Mr. Solheim and Mr. Diaz, you all showed us some of the solutions on how to make this transition towards a greener economy. And we all know how to do it. We need renewables and innovative solutions. But then we have the oil companies, like for instance Norwegian Statoil, which don't seem to share this vision on how to reach the 2-degree goal. And they are investing in new areas and now even touching upon the Arctic. So my question to you is, how they got it all wrong? Are the oil companies investing themselves out of the future? Thank you.
Now that's a tough question, but it's a great question. Because, you know, one of the problems that we have is that we are always saying that, and I said it myself, we need a lot of energy to make the transition. And we need a lot of energy to bring the rest of the world out of poverty and up to our standard of living. But then the similarity stops. Because some companies then say we need to do the same thing that we have done again. I set out a number of options, of roads and avenues we could take that will lead us to the sustainable energy chain, because it's not done overnight. But let me say it this way. The scientists of this world in the United Nations panel on climate change, they said very clearly that we've got to, and the world leaders as well, we've got to remain in a scenario that limits global temperature change to 2 degrees. And the governments of the richest country of the world coming together at the International Energy Agency in Paris, they've said very clearly, now if we want to do that, and we take all the fossil fuels that we have left under the ground, then we are going to reach 6 degrees Celsius climate change, which means that we need to leave 2/3 of the remaining fossil fuels in the ground, under the ground. So the question then becomes, who should be able to exploit and to benefit from burning that fossil fuels? I think that other countries who are on a different path should have a priority. A country like Norway should not be able to move into fragile, difficult areas such as Lofoten, such as the Barents Sea, such as the Arctic, will have huge risks and consequences to destroy an extremely important marine environment when we know that we must leave so much fossil fuels under the ground. Leave it then to those who are much poorer than us and who need that energy to grow out of poverty. Thank you.
I think there are different answers to your question. I'm in no doubt that Statoil are among the best oil companies in the world. I think from what I've seen globally, there is absolutely no reason to doubt that. They are among the best when it comes to financial management, avoiding corruption, environmental practices, etc. So in that sense, they are part of the solution because we will need oil production for a time to come. But they should not be allowed to move into the most difficult areas, like into the Arctic. And it should be very, very clear to all oil companies that if they do so, they will have to pay for the all cost if there are any problems. What Obama basically did with the oil spill in the Mexican Gulf, I think was a very important step, and every government should explain to the oil companies that that's what we want to do. What Obama said was that we will have no limit to the cost for the cleaning up in the Mexican Gulf. The entire bill will be provided to BP, and if BP goes broke, it's not our business. That's what he said. The cost for the BP has been enormous, and no one knows what will be the final outcome. If you make that absolutely clear to all oil companies, that if they go into the most difficult areas, they will have to provide every solution to the cleanup if there are any difficulties. They will have to provide insurance and all other costs. No one will come and salvage them. Then there will be very clear limits as to how far they will go, because no one will be ready to insure activities far into the Arctic. And then we should add one other element. It's not realistic to believe that the oil companies will be those driving the change. The change will come from the others, from the solar, from the wind, from all the startups. And I think this is, from people like you, this is parallel to the IT sector. It was not the IBMs who drove the change in the IT sector. It was the Microsoft at the time when Bill Gates was a boy in Seattle, not the richest man in the world. It was the Googles and all the others. It came from the upstarts. And I think also in the environmental sector, yes, these big companies will have to change, must be much more environmentally friendly, but the real drive for change will have to come from the upstarts.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Diaz?
No, I just wanted to say that although this is some of the ideals, in many places, government policy is very much lobbied to stay the same. And there's a big gap between research in the universities and what the government is doing. And so this one has to be narrowed. And instead of the business as usual, there should be business unusual, which is more and more young people should be able to enter into these discussions. And I mean, you'll notice when you go to the COP areas that NGOs have their own place and they're totally forbidden to the negotiations. And this is a great, this is a great tragedy in the sense that it doesn't allow ideas to expand. So it's great, But a lot of the money is not going to renewable ideas, and so more governments should see this as a critical new way, instead of letting the university try to come up with one-off small ideas rather than try to see what works and expand. Because maybe the solution, if you keep on applying the same solution to the same problem, maybe with all these problems, it's not going to expand. Maybe there's some other way.
Thank you. Mihai Klapanielek.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and Håkon Duus can get ready.
Halla, Shera. Okay, so my name is Mihai Klapaniuk. Maybe my handwriting wasn't that good. Anyway, I'm Mihai Klapaniuk from Moldova, workshop number 2, natural resources. And the question is for the first speaker: what peace-building lessons can we learn from the mediation process you were involved in? And also, along with the question, I would like to present my vision that stimulation of trade, economics, commerce, businesses, entrepreneurship between the two conflicting parts could be actually the solution towards the political, sometimes artificial obstacles that are created in conflicting zones. So what lessons can we learn from the peace-building process you were involved in? You were involved in the conflicting mediation process you were involved in Sri Lanka, as I heard. Yeah, what lessons for peace building? Simple as that.
For environment or generally?
Generally, I would say, but could be linked. Thank you.
Håkon Duus, if you want to ask your question now, we will take both at the same time.
Right. Sorry, is there anybody from the developing world about problems? This is a very first world kind of questionnaire. Can we just have some people from the developing world tell us about your problems? Because I'm just saying that it's great, but you can ask your question. I'm just saying that maybe we should have development world problems here as a balance, because we get crowded out. Thank you.
We have Ruth from the Philippines coming up after, so Håkon Duus, you can ask your question.
Right. My name is Håkon Duus. I'm from Norway, and I'm a ISFiT volunteer. My question goes to Erik Solheim. You've been talking a lot about political will tonight, and we have all seen the solutions or what we are supposed to do, and I guess all of us here know what we need to do. But as you said, we lack the political will. And I wonder if we lack the political will to actually face the problems and to do something, or do the politicians lack the guts to not be re-elected when they give us our reforms and the people aren't happy, but they save the globe. So the question is, do we lack the political will to face change, or do you lack the political guts to not be re-elected? Thank you.
All right.
There are many reasons why there is not sufficient will. I mean, obviously one is that some politicians are afraid of not being re-elected if they take dramatic steps. But very often, unfortunately, politicians believe that they will be unpopular, while in the long run they are popular if they do real leadership. I can spend the entire night providing you with examples of politicians who became extremely popular by providing leadership. I mentioned Brazil. The president of Brazil, President Lula, he left office with 86% approval rate. What a wet dream for Jens Stoltenberg or any Norwegian politician. 86% of the people wanted to be re-elected. Why so? Well, he had provided leadership, a good investment climate in Brazil, enormous efforts for the very poor of Brazil, a fantastic environmental policy, all this at the same time. So that leadership paid off, and I can give you many, many other examples. Let me give you one Norwegian example. 10 years back in Norway, a new smoking legislation was introduced by a conservative Norwegian politician. The media, there was very little support. Half the population was against at that point. Media was full of articles that Norwegian people will be lonely if they cannot smoke freely in restaurants. The restaurant business will go broke. There will be a number of new cases in the psychiatric clinics if we do this. But he continued, and he continued, and he did it. Today, 95% of the Norwegians support this legislation, which was enormously controversial at it happened. And that is the kind of leadership we need. And the only solution is that you must look for those politicians you believe have the ability and will to lead. I have a few candidates, but I won't mention names. And you must avoid the others. At the same time, you must also provide leadership bottom-up, and that is new ideas from the bottom, from people, from students, but it's also support to those politicians who dare to lead. Because if they do not get support when they dare to lead, then it's difficult. And today we have a political climate in Norway, frankly, where the parliament, where the media, where Riksrevisjonen and a number of other bodies are running around finding small faults with the politicians. If they've done a small mistake, you can continue with that for months, rather than asking the much more important question, have that guy done anything of importance for you? What is that? And what does he or she intend to do in the future? And if they have not provided any major leadership in an important issue, get them out and get someone else. But not focusing on whether they made a mistake in a small, second important type of issue. Then the other question also goes incredibly broad. What are the lessons learned from Norwegian involvement in peace processes? I can just, I've written a book to do some PR. It will come in 2 weeks' time. Unfortunately, it's in Norwegian language. It's called Politics is About Will. So it is answering all these questions about political will, but it's also about 100 pages about Norwegian experiences in peace process in Sri Lanka, in Sudan, Nepal, in Myanmar, and other places where I've been involved. To sum up the main experiences, you must believe in dialogue. You must speak with everyone, even evil presidents and terrorist leaders. You must mobilize the international community behind you. You must have a good relationship to the main powers of the world, that's United States, China, and others. And you must do your utmost to provide confidence and trust and finding solutions. I can speak for hours on this, but these are some of the highlights. And Norway has played a more important role in peace processes than any other small nation in the world, and we should be very proud of that. And we have a good number of people with experience, and I would be happy to speak about that at another occasion. There were some Tamils and Sinhalese from Sri Lanka here. I know there are people from Burundi here as well. These are two nations where I've been a lot involved. But I think it's somewhat besides the main topic of the conversation. But thank you.
Our last question will be from Ruth from the Philippines. So you can come up. Just 1 second. And also, I need you to remind you that Mr. Diaz would need his solar lamps back. So whoever who has them could put them here. So Ruth, you're welcome.
My question is, I'm Ruth from Market Workshop, and my question is for, for Mr. Illac Diaz. You've presented the Liter of Light project as like a bridge technology until aid comes. And since we're talking about looking for renewable energy from other speakers, have you ever tried pushing it as like the real solution that the world needs now than just a makeshift solution that while waiting for like power for rural areas?
So, you know what started us out with the energy solution and also the NGO solution is to have other countries invent your solution. You have to pay them patents. You have to pay them for manufacturing. You have to pay them for aid. You have to pay. Whenever you ask for a solution from another country, especially when it comes to aid, they tell you, yes, we'll help you, but only with that country's products. You buy from it. So in the end, you end up paying for not being innovative. The second part is if you ask a foreign NGO to help you, 60% on average of all their operating costs, especially if they're in that country, by the time it gets to you, it's like 20%. So they pay for their salaries, they pay for their operations, rent. So many times, I'm not saying all, there are great ones, but we use a rule of thumb. It's better to start a local movement. That way the money stays there rather than bring in a foreign solution. So that's just a rule of thumb. Now, my point really was looking for something that we can do, because all the solutions are solutions that are given by others, and it's kind of very difficult to go by that when you know that it will cause a certain great financial strain on your company. You have to export all that money to buy a windmill. And so what I'm saying is, if we cannot export that much money, then maybe we should do something now. So you might be talking about bridge solution, but think about one windmill. How many tons that saved? What we were thinking, what if 300,000 people saved, let's say 200 kilos of carbon? Does anybody know how to compute 300,000 times 200? That's how many tons? Would you put it at 60 tons? 60 tons of carbon? Would that be the right thing? So anyway, the thing there is, by the small, you can help out the many, and you could make more impact than just putting your money in, which will have to pay over 25, 30 national debt. So it's not a bridge solution. It's just so simple that maybe we should think of our own solutions than allow other people to force it upon us. And I think it's about time that we look for those micro solutions rather than wait for those big solutions that never come. And if it comes, it's so expensive that in truth it costs more. Yes, you might receive less green electricity, but the thing there is, it puts up the national debt to such a large amount that the next generations will be paying for it. So green solution, large amount of debt, or small solutions that have viral expansion rates that could affect many. So it's a balance, and then one day our point is maybe other people will fund us and we can grow. So as a Filipina, you know what? We're always beneficiary, help us. We have problems, help us. And what I'm telling you is why we're doing is because maybe we want to become, Philippines to become beneficiaries to the world, that we can teach the world. We know poverty so well that maybe we can teach other people around the world how to solve their own problems without having to depend always on aid. So that's my point.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I will give each of you 30 seconds for some closing remarks. And so thank you very much. You can start with Mr. Diaz, and then Solheim, and then Frisvold.
So when you have problems, my thing there is the young people should be given a chance and funding to solve it. They know more about our country's problems than somebody coming from abroad and trying to figure it out. We live in it. We know this in and out. We should be given the chance to be able to say our word, that maybe we know better than other countries. Second is the fact that innovation should be, instead of a large amount of money given abroad for solutions, maybe a certain big portion should also be given to locally invented technologies to be scalable. And only such we don't have to pay patent rates, we don't have to pay manufacturers, we don't have to pay for foreign jobs, but we also can create our own national green jobs, our own national green industries, which is still unattainable if we are entirely dependent on the green model that's currently done. So if you have a green idea, if you have a new idea, don't just say that, just because we're from a developing nation, you said we're as good as everybody else. and we can make a big difference locally as well as cooperating internationally. Don't buy everything off the shelf.
Thank you.
I think I've underlined repeatedly what's my main point, and that's the following. For the first time in world history, it's possible to solve the main challenges facing humankind. Basically, if you are God looking down to planet Earth, there are not many problems. It's quite positive. But still 1 billion people are living in extreme, abrupt poverty. That's completely unacceptable. We are destroying the environment of this globe while most of us are becoming richer and richer. That's also unacceptable. But both these two problems can be resolved if there is political will. So, sorry, everything is about mobilizing that political will, top down, bottom up, and that's sorry, where you all can contribute a lot. I will make one more final point, because there are lots of people who are doing dialogues on Burundi, understood Azerbaijan, Sri Lanka and others, and also one person asked about experience from peace process. Let me underline one more point. The most important, though, even you must have the political will to force ahead, you must also be able to compromise. Otherwise you will come nowhere. In the peace process in Sri Lanka, many times people came to me and said, I'm brilliant, I'm fantastic, I've been to negotiations and I gave nothing. Look to me. Because you always ask, if you gave nothing, what did the other guy give? And the answer is obvious. Nothing happened in that brilliant discussion. The person was proud of himself, but achieved nothing. We must compromise to save this world. Everyone understands that in their daily life. No family can survive without compromise. Me deciding what we will have to dinner every day, what we'll do every weekend, where we will have holiday, everything, and that will be divorced in, I'll tell you, in 2 days' time or something. But it's the same with sport club, religious group, a nation, and the global community. Nothing can survive without compromise. So we must reach out to each other with compromise, but based on that political will. And that's maybe, if you ask one lesson from Norwegian peace processes, is let's make compromise that wonderful word which it is.
So at this point, I'll just say that, take advantage of the fantastic time you have. Study hard, but party hard. But also use the time to reflect and to think and to carve out a direction of where you want to bring yourself, which path you want to take. Try to set goals. Try to see how you can contribute to bring us out of the fossil age. We did not leave the Stone Age because of lack of stones. We're not going to leave the fossil age because of lack of fossil fuels. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of you. There is a show coming up in a very short amount of time, so we need all of you to clear the room as quick as possible. And again, a warm welcome, a warm applause to our speakers. Thank you so much.